You're drifting. You're a drifter, yeah. Is a drifter better or worse than a hobo? Than a hobo. Yeah, I don't know. They kind of operate in the same arena. Well, I guess would a hobo be a subset of drifter? I think so. These are the hard-hitting questions that I know everybody comes to Bible study for. Well, good morning, class. So glad to have you here today. We are continuing our study of the book of Genesis. We have thus far traveled through 37 chapters. And as I mentioned last week, we are going to leapfrog over 38. Feel free to have a look at it in your own time. And as I have offered, if generous questions or you just have interesting thoughts from it and you want to share that with me, that's great. But we're going to stick with Joseph right now. 38 is an excursus into some of the Judah story. Doesn't have a big impact on the Joseph story. They're in different places. It's interesting and important stuff, and it has to do with the lineage of Jesus, but for the sake of coherence, we're just going with Joseph. We'll get to the end of the book, and then we'll figure out what we're going to study next. So I'm not going to take you all the way back to the beginning for our review. We've done that plenty. Hopefully you remember creation, Adam and Eve. Hopefully you remember Cain and Abel, Lamech, Seth, Lamech, Noah. I do trust that you remember the Tower of... I told you I wasn't taking you back to the beginning, and here we are. I trust that you remember the Tower of Babel. And the book of Genesis sort of starts anew, in a sense, with Abraham. So up until the story of Abraham, we're sort of flying by generation. You know, we paused on Noah, but we didn't really spend any time on the generation before him, not really much on the generation after him, you know? But with Abraham, we get not his whole life story, but the second half of his life. We get his midlife story. So 75 until, what was he, 150-ish when he died? Way up there. We get his story, in which God is very direct and explicit about making promises to him and his family. Promises that can only be accepted by faith because they make no rational sense. There's no way a postmenopausal Sarah should be having babies, but it's going to happen. There's, how do you raise a kid when you're 100 years old? I don't know, but God is faithful. God did it. And the promises aren't just narrowly for their family, but for the whole world. He has I don't want to say illegitimate son. It's not exactly that, because he takes Hagar as a wife, I suppose. But then he casts her aside. It's messy. So he has a son by Hagar, Ishmael. And then he has another son, eventually, through Sarah, the one that God actually promised to him. And that son is Isaac. Isaac is offered as a sacrifice, and God delivers up a substitute in his place in the ram caught in the thicket. So Isaac's life is redeemed by God, and he goes on to marry Rebekah. They're late in years also, but God does deliver them a son or two. They get twins. And I think twins usually go one of two ways. Either they are just tight, or the closeness actually leads to strife and discord. And that's a caricature. Probably it's a mixture of both in every relationship, but certainly with Jacob and Esau, it is more strife than harmony. They don't seem mutually supportive. Dad has a favorite. Mom has a favorite. I guess it's a mercy that they both don't have the same favorite son, but it's not a good situation. And y'all know the story of Jacob and Esau, where Jacob sort of manipulates, grifts his older brother, older by seconds, brother, into giving away his birthright. He defrauds his father into giving him the blessing that was meant for Esau. And that's a strange situation, because it isn't like it's the power of Isaac that's blessing him. He's asking for God's blessing, and God's not fooled. But, sometimes we're limited in how we think about God, and I think that's more the case here. Jacob flees for his life because Esau is just waiting to kill his brother. He lives in the land of Haran with his uncle, yes, Laban, and works for 20 years, getting himself 2 wives who are sisters, who are both vying for Jacob's time and attention and favor. And in the process, they also hand over their servants to be Jacob's wives too. And so now Jacob has 4 wives, and he definitely has a hierarchy of who he likes best and not. Terrible, ugly stuff. He winds up with 12 sons. And eventually he has to go home because relations with Laban aren't great, since Laban has been defrauding him this whole time. And that whole season of being on the receiving end of manipulation and fraud affected a positive change in Jacob's heart. Jacob is now more courageous, more humble, more forthright, more mature. And he's going home, uncertain of what he'll find. Maybe his father's dead, maybe not. He wouldn't know. They don't have cell phones or even a postal service. And if his father has died, then Esau might have been planning this whole time to kill him. So he's on his way, thinking of how he can placate his brother, how he can mend the fences with his brother, and he is waylaid by the angel of the Lord. An angel appears and wrestles Jacob all night long, right before he's going to meet Esau. And as the sun's coming up, the angel's like, we're out of time. I got to end this thing. So he reaches over and pops Jacob's hip socket. Now Jacob is exhausted and wounded. And so moving forward, he's now going to have to walk with a walking stick. If you're about to face your potentially murderous hunter athlete of a brother, this is not the physical state you want to be in, You want to have a good night's sleep, maybe do some carb loading and get after it. But that's not his situation. The angel he wrestled also, while refusing to give its name, gives to Jacob a new name. Calls him Israel, which means struggles with God, wrestles with God. So Israel sets off his least favorite family in the front, and then his second least favorite family in the second place, and then his second to favorite in the third place, and then his favorite in the fourth place, right? So I guess if the 400 men with Esau are killing people, maybe they'll be tired by the time his favorites get there. I don't know. When Jacob finally does engage with Esau, it's nothing like what he expected. He sees Esau, Esau sees him, Esau runs up to him, grabs hold of him, and it's not violent. It's heartwarming. Esau cries on his shoulder, and he cries on Esau's shoulder, and they're embracing as brothers who haven't seen each other in 20 years. And they make amends. And their relationship is restored, in part because Jacob put himself in the place of humility, and I think in part because whatever Esau grew into and grew through during his time without his brother, God had blessed and protected Jacob all these years, and they don't like become roommates then. Esau goes his way, Jacob goes his, but there's that tension and animosity is not there anymore. Jacob's got this big family, 12 sons, and he's got favorite wives. Guess what? He's got favorite sons too. His favorite is Joseph, his second to last born from his favorite wife, Rachel. He has another son, a younger son. His name is Benjamin. And sadly, Rachel doesn't survive the childbearing. So Joseph and Benjamin are all that Jacob has left of his favorite wife, the wife that he worked 14 years to marry. 14 years is a long time to pursue a woman when you're already a grown adult, you know? But so it is. He dotes on Joseph. He gives him some fancy clothes that are probably not good for working in, you know, long sleeves or fancy colors or whatever translation winds up being more faithful. The point is, it's fancy clothes that sets him apart. 17-ish, and his major role with his brothers professionally is he is a snitch. Right? He goes, he watches what his brothers do. When they do anything wrong, he comes back and tells Dad. How do you suppose that makes his brothers feel about him? Yeah, I'm sure he's the most popular, right? It gets worse. He has these dreams that, well, they might be prophetic. He doesn't interpret them. He just shares them. He tells his brothers, hey, y'all got to hear this dream. I had this dream that we were all cutting wheat, right? And as we bound it up, my wheat stood up. And all y'all's wheat bowed down to my wheat. And his brothers are like, what are you saying? Are you saying we're going to bow down to you? Like, what's going on? And then he has another dream. This one he tells his dad, he says, Dad, I had this dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars. They all bowed down to me. And his dad's like, what? Are you saying that me and your mom and all your brothers are going to bow down to you? Is that what you're trying to tell me right now? We don't know what Joseph said, but in response, but I can imagine Joseph was like, I was just telling you what I dreamed, man. It's kind of up to you what you think about it. So already early in Joseph's life, we get this idea of prophetic dreams and interpretations. He's been the dreamer in these situations. And that is sort of the final straw for his brothers. Um, they're like, you know what? I've about had it with this dreamer and his fancy coat and his smugness and his bleh. So they conspire to strip him of his coat, to kill him, and then to tell their father that they found the coat and ask him what he thought, and let Jacob come to his own conclusion that, oh no, Joseph must have been attacked by animals. So his oldest brothers, Reuben and Judah, they're not on board with this plan. Reuben says, you know what, I'll tell you what, let's just throw him in this pit. That way his blood won't be on our hands. We can go through the rest of the plan. We'll just throw him in this pit and leave him there. Judah's plan was to come back later and get him out. Judah's off getting coffee or whatever he's doing. And Reuben, second oldest, Reuben's the oldest. Judah is like, yo, you know what, actually? We could make some money off of this. There's some traders coming through, and they trade in cosmetics and medicine, embalming materials. Why don't we just sell him? That way we can make some money. We're rid of him. We can keep the same story. It's all good. So that's what they do. And when Reuben comes back and finds that Joseph isn't there, he panics. Because his plan was to take him back home, right? But the deed is done. And that's kind of where we left the end of chapter 37. Joseph is taken away. He's bought for 20 shekels. I had hoped it was 30 because that would have been really cool in terms of parallelisms with Jesus, but there it is. So they sell their brother off for 20 shekels. And he's on his way to Egypt. Now, luxury merchants, probably their clientele will be, if you're a luxury merchant, yeah, rich people, rich and important people. And that is, in fact, the case. By the way, these merchants, does anybody remember what their nationality is or their affiliation? Ishmaelites. That's right. All right. So Joseph's brought into Egypt, and he's sold off to Potiphar. Potiphar is one of Pharaoh's officials, captain of the guard. That will actually matter here in a little bit, right? But clearly Potiphar is a pretty important person. He can afford an expensive slave like Joseph. So returning to Joseph's story, starting in Genesis chapter 39. Now Joseph had been brought to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. Ooh, I wonder if he bought him for 30 shekels since, you got to turn a profit. I don't know. All right, so again, remember, these are luxury merchants. They sell to important people, right? Verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord caused all he did to succeed in his hands. All right. Hopefully you're noticing a pattern here, right? Which is a man of low character winds up in hardship, and during that time of hardship, he develops his character. And God blesses him along the way. We will revisit this theme when we get toward the end of Joseph's story, but I want to mention it now. Many people have the wrong understanding about what it means to be blessed by God. Right? They think that being blessed by God means they'll be kept out of difficult circumstances. If God approved me, if God blessed me, if I was really favored by God, I wouldn't be in this place right now. Why is Joseph in bondage right now? From the story, why is he in bondage? Revenge for what? So if you say being his father's favorite, that makes it seem like it's Jacob's fault. And that might be partly true. I would say they couldn't stand him because he was insufferable. Who bears the responsibility for that? Joseph, right? Could God have spared him from this? Yes. Did God afflict him with this? Well, you could interpret it that way. I would say he is responsible for his current situation as much as his brothers are. Right? And yet, in his circumstances, God is still blessing him. So that blessing doesn't mean he avoids the hardship. It doesn't mean that he is saved from all the bad circumstances. But what it does mean is that God is with him in the hardship. God is with him in the circumstances. Who's the beneficiary? So all that Joseph is doing is coming up roses. Who does that benefit in the story? Is this benefiting Jacob right now? No, who's getting rich? Who's succeeding? Who's thriving? No, not Joseph. He's a slave. Potiphar. Yeah. And this maybe calls to mind the idea that God said to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and you will be a blessing to the whole world. Right? So Joseph, verse 4, so Joseph found favor in his sight, Potiphar's, and attended him. And he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. Because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. That's a cushy position to be in, right? He bought a slave who turned out to be so competent and trustworthy that he could literally put management of everything on that slave, and he could just wake up and go, what do we want to eat today? That's his biggest concern. Now, of course, he still has a job. He's the captain of the Pharaoh's guard, and it's that. But like his domestic life is taken care of. He's feeling really good about that. Now, let's have a word about slavery here. I have to because it's so a part of the American consciousness and our American story that we need to recognize the similarities and differences because it's not 100% the same. But it's still slavery. So you'll notice Joseph's in this position where he's obviously not voluntarily working for Potiphar. This isn't even like a debt issue, right? We've talked about how sometimes slavery in the ancient world is, I've got debts beyond what I can pay, so I'll just basically transfer my debt into some years of service as a servant. Right? That's a really common form of slavery in the ancient world. But this isn't that either. This is a prisoner who was captured, delivered up as a slave. So seems to be a fairly wicked form of slavery, for sure. At the same time, obviously, he isn't just doing menial labor. obviously, um, he is given a remarkable amount of freedom. Probably not facing a whole lot of hardship. Now, I would not want to use the conduct of a pagan Egyptian as a key to what the Bible says is good, proper, and moral. But I do think it's worth recognizing. Because the Bible will talk about slavery in a number of different ways, and it's worth knowing that it's not all perfectly identical to what is historical about the American slave trade. You need a kind of broader scope to understand it. All right, so that's that. Potiphar is doing really well. God is blessing Potiphar through Joseph. The question you might want to ask is, what would be God's motivation for that? Why would God want to bless Potiphar? Because God could do anything in this situation. He could easily liberate Joseph. Right? He could, have enemies come in and take Potiphar captive, and then Joseph escapes. Or he could just have angels open the doors, and then he walks out, like happened with Peter. Like, any of these things are possible. That's not what God is doing here. And God has his reasons for doing things. So why do we suppose that God is blessing Potiphar for Joseph's sake? So it's part of the way that God's protecting Joseph and helping Joseph flourish. I think that's true. But I think it might have a broader purpose too. I'm sorry? Yeah, so this is preparation. It will move Joseph into a good position in the future. But I also think, and this shouldn't be, I think we tend to gloss this over, but I don't think we should gloss this over. As happened with Abraham, we saw this with how people talked about Abraham at the end of his life, as happened with Jacob, and as is happening with Joseph. People see the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, and the God of Joseph at work in their life. And so they are becoming aware of the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. This was really, really brought to the forefront in the book of Daniel, which we studied last year, that through the way that God blessed the work of their hands, he was making himself known to people who wouldn't otherwise know him. And I think that's true here too. I think God is blessing Joseph in the house of Potiphar so that Potiphar might know Joseph's God is great. And all the people of that house that he's working with, God is revealing himself in this way. The story's not going to tell us a lot on that front. So there is a little bit of conjecture on my part, but not a lot, right? Let's keep going. Still in verse 6. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Whenever that's a story-relevant detail, you know trouble is coming. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." The moment that happens, Joseph is in a lose-lose situation. If he says yes, he is betraying his master. If he says no, he is angering and or embarrassing his master's wife. What's a guy to do? Verse 8, but he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house and has put everything that he has in my charge. He's not greater in this house than I am. I'd be careful with that one, buddy. Nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Note here, there are two reasons for him to say no. One, out of respect for his master, right? And that would be an answer enough. But remember, I told you that he's in this house so that God may be made known, right? I don't know what the Egyptians' God would have thought about this situation, but I know what Joseph's God thinks about this situation, right? Joseph says, I cannot do this because it would be a betrayal of my master. Moreover, it would be a great wickedness in the sight of my God. As she spoke to Joseph, day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. Look, at some point, lady, have some respect. Take a hint. But she's just trying to wear him down, right? And I can't help but think that might be more than just her liking the handsome young man. There might be something more sinister here about her trying to exercise some control, or like something on that level. She's trying to win. But one day, he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house. That sounds suspicious. We're not informed as to the why. But it happened. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. So, you can imagine the situation. She grabs him physically by the clothes. And he's like, I got to get out of here. Right? He's got no witnesses to back him up. Right? So he takes off. She doesn't let go so much that she tears his clothes off of him. Yeah, that's the right face for that situation. Oh, yeah. Bad has gone to worse now, right? Because if people aren't in the house, they might be out of the house, and now he's coming out of the house, and he is no longer fully dressed, right? She's got his clothes as evidence. Now, by our standards today, this would be workplace harassment, bordering all the way up to assault, right? But these aren't our days, and he does not have the same protections and legal standing that we have. As soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. Wait, who'd she call to? I thought they weren't there. They're not far, right? I feel like she's manipulated this whole situation from the start. Anyway, so she calls to them. It says, see, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. Who's the he? Who brought the Hebrew among them? Her husband, right? Think about these words. See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that, I lifted up my voice and cried out. He left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. I want you to note, she's not only smearing Joseph's reputation, and look, I gotta imagine people have been witnessing her like ugly cougar behavior this whole time, right? So people probably know, but she's the boss's wife, right? What are they gonna do? So she's fabricated this whole story and engineered this whole situation, and she puts the blame on her husband. I gotta think there's some not a healthy marriage, right? Um, so she's stirring up the people not just against Joseph but against Potiphar. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. What does that mean? Is she spreading it out in the bed, like staging a crime scene or something? I don't know. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." Look, this story doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really hold up to any scrutiny. But it's the word of head of the house's wife, or the man himself's wife, against a slave whom he bought and brought into the house from another country. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. He was there in prison. Wait, what was Potiphar's job again? Captain of the guard for Pharaoh? Yeah. It says his anger was kindled, and the quick reading of this would seem to be that he's angry at Joseph. That might be true. If he's savvy, he might be not only angry with Joseph, he might actually be angry with his wife. Because his wife has just engineered a situation to ostensibly kill the golden goose. Joseph had been a source of blessing and prosperity in this house. And for whatever pathological reason, his wife had to ensure that Joseph was going away. I suspect it all had to do with that initial rejection of her. I think that initial rejection led to all this other stuff. Did Joseph make the wrong call by telling her no in the first place? So let me get this straight. Joseph did what was right, and because he did what was right, he had to suffer negative consequences? Is that fair? Surely in a world where God reigns supreme, you get punished for doing bad things and rewarded for doing good things, right? Doesn't always work out that way in this world. And yet, has God abandoned Joseph? Is there more blessing to come? Yeah. And as we'll see, not only was there blessing when he was in the dry cistern, not only was there blessing, he was sold off as a slave. There will be blessings in prison. I don't even know how you say that sentence with a straight face. You know, this stuff still happens to this day. You don't even have to commit the crime, let alone be found guilty. Sometimes accusation is enough. But God didn't abandon him. In fact, it says in verse 21, "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. That all happened really smoothly and quickly. I wonder how that might have happened. Maybe the captain of the guard said something to the head of the prison about the inmate they were taking in. Or maybe not. I mean, maybe the simple reading is the right one. Potiphar's just mad and it just worked out this way. I don't think it makes a difference which one is the way it all worked out, because it's still God making it happen. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Well, that's just like what had happened in Potiphar's house. It is interesting to me, though, in terms of position, this is the same kind of thing he was doing in Jacob's house with his brothers. Right? Wasn't he the overseer? Wasn't he the manager? What do you suppose is making the difference here between his, I would say, relative failure in Jacob's house and abundant success in Potiphar's house and even in prison? Yeah, humility, right? I think that is a big part of it, right? He started in Jacob's house from a privileged position of being the favorite. But when you're sold as a slave into somebody's house and they don't know you at all, you're not the favorite. You're just the new guy. So it's been character growth through hardship. That's what we saw. We saw it in the life of Jacob for sure, and we're seeing it again in the life of Joseph. The other thing I will tell you is God is explicitly at work here. No question about it. The author is telling us over and over again. It doesn't say that Joseph is the smartest guy or the most skilled guy. He's probably growing in intelligence. He's probably growing in wisdom. He's getting better at the job probably through repetition. But it says not that through Joseph's towering competence, but rather the Lord blessed all that he did. Now, here's what I will say Joseph is bringing to bear, both in Potiphar's house and in prison. Not towering competence, but trustworthiness, uprightness of character. That, I think we can attest to. If you're given a lot of liberty in prison, what will that encourage many prisoners to do? Yeah, escape. The whole idea of prison is people are watching over you. The story we get here is he was so trustworthy that they didn't even bother watching over him anymore. They just knew they could trust him to do the thing. And to do it right. Yeah, and is it right that he's in prison? Is it fair and just that he's in prison? No. Does that become a justification for him to break out of prison? No. He seems to be patient in his injustice, willing to bear his afflictions, and just see, well, in this circumstance, how best can I serve God? How best can I serve my neighbor? This is a hard thing for a lot of us to swallow because, when we read about stories of, Joseph and Gideon and David going out fighting wars and conquering people, it's like, yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, sometimes that's the thing that God calls you to, but it's certainly not the default mode. If I look at the life of Jesus, he didn't take up the sword at all. He also didn't lobby or campaign for any sort of policy changes in Rome or any of that. He lived a life of humble service, stood up for what was true, right? He didn't back down from the truth. But he bared his affliction without lashing out. He trusted in the Father. And for that reason, according to Scripture, the Father glorified him. So, have I talked to you guys about the idea of types and antitypes in Scripture? Is that a term I've used with y'all before? Okay. This is sort of a theological term, but it's also kind of a literary term. The idea here is that the type is the main thing. The antitypes are the things before the main thing. They're not anti, they're antitypes. So they're the thing before the thing that foreshadows or hints at it, right? So you can think about the heavenly kingdom that will come about when Christ comes to restore all creation, right? That would be the type. The antitype, you might say, oh, yeah. So like the temple in the Old Testament. The temple was meant to kind of show this idea of the dwelling place of God is with men. You could be physically close to the holiness of God, So the temple is sort of an antitype for the throne of God. Many events of the Old Testament serve as, so they're out in the wilderness, plague of snakes. Well, they're plagued by snakes, I should say. And everybody's getting poisoned and they're dying. And God tells Moses to raise up a bronze snake on the pole so that everybody who looks to the snake will be healed and live, right? That's an antitype for Christ on the cross, right? Where Christ takes on the affliction, right? So if the snakes are the sins, if the snake is a type for the sin, you can imagine that what we see is Christ taking our sins to the cross, and there they are crucified, right? And the people have nothing to do but to turn their eyes to the cross to be saved, right? So we have a type that foreshadows the thing that is to come. And we see this, I think, in the life of Jacob. I think we see this in the life of Joseph. There are these ways in which these characters are anticipations of the work that Christ will do, or of the character of Christ in some cases. It doesn't equate them, right? It doesn't mean like Jacob is the same as Jesus, or Joseph is the same as Jesus. Certainly not. But we see through some of the events in their lives glimpses of the character and work of Jesus. And I think this is one of those, right? In how he patiently bears up under his affliction, wrongfully imprisoned, and yet even his imprisoners are blessed by his presence. All right, that's it for time today, and we finished the chapter, so huzzah! So Genesis chapter 40, next week. And so go freshen up your coffee, do what you need to do, come on back for worship.